You are listening to the Cookbook Love podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 298.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're all doing well. We are getting ready to head to Chicago tomorrow to move our youngest son up to Chicago for his new job and spend Memorial Day weekend in the Windy City. On Lake Michigan, it always seems like Memorial Day weekend is the kickoff to their beautiful summers, and we are looking forward to the weekend, getting him settled into his apartment and enjoying the weather and the lake. So I hope you're all doing well. I'm excited to be here today with an interview with Amy Myrdal Miller. Amy is an award-winning dietitian, culinary nutrition expert, and public speaker. She is the president of Farmer's Daughter Consulting and was the collaborator on the 4th edition of Cooking a la Heart with Linda Hachfeld. Cooking a la Heart was first published in the early 1990s by Apple-a-Day Press, and some of you may recognize that as a cookbook that was originally comb-bound and has sold well over 100,000 copies. The version we're talking about today is the 4th version with 500 easy and delicious recipes to make every meal heart healthy. Today on the podcast, Amy and I talk about the opportunity she had to co-author this book, her joys and frustrations she faced while writing this cookbook, her belief in honoring different food cultures, as well as her advice to cookbook writers. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Amy Myrdal Miller. Hi, Amy. Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast.
Hi, Maggie. I'm happy to be here with you today.
Yes, so excited to talk to you. As always, love to talk to people involved in cookbook work. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I am a farmer's daughter who grew up on a family farm in Northeast North Dakota, the youngest of 5 kids. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 7. So my mom got me into the kitchen from a very early age, and I just fell in love with it. I ended up becoming a registered dietitian. I went to college in Northern California, where I now live. And then when I did a dietetic internship, I realized I didn't love standing next to someone's hospital bed or sitting with them in an outpatient clinic. And so I went straight to graduate school for nutrition communications and marketing. I worked in the food industry for a long time. My most recent employer was the Culinary Institute of America. And about 10 years ago, I started my company, Father's Daughter Consulting, which does a lot of work across our food system, from seed companies that breed seed for fruit and vegetable crops to working with restaurants and campus dining operations. And then, of course, I'm here because I'm a cookbook author.
Yeah. And I think that being a nutrition expert and cookbook writing go hand in hand perfectly together. And we do share that background, and we both, I think, have a approach to cooking and to food that it really is the key to good health. And that leads us to the book that you've been involved in. And I want you to tell the story of this book, because this book is a little bit different than some of the other books I've had on the show, whereas this is a 4th edition, a revision of a book that's been out for a while, already has had well over 100,000 copies sold, and it's called Cooking a la Heart. Tell us the story about the book and how you got involved in the book and the most recent revision.
Well, I'll start with how I got the opportunity to contribute to the 4th edition. In early 2021, I was on a Zoom meeting for the San Francisco chapter of Les Dames d'Escoffier, and it was a toast to the new year. And all of us Doms were supposed to answer one question: what are your hopes for 2021? And I was one of the last people to respond, and nearly everybody else had said something related to, I'm hoping for a vaccine. As we all recall painfully, we were still struggling with the pandemic, and here in California, we were still very locked down. And so when it came time for me to answer, instead of saying what most other people had said, I blurted out, I want to write a book. And Tony Allegra, who is well known in cookbook writing circles, said to me, "What do you want to write about?" And I said, I don't know. And she goes, "Well, why did you say that?" And I said, "I don't know. I feel like there's a book in me." So fast forward about a month, I did a webinar, a continuing education webinar for USA Pulses, talking about, the top 10 reasons to cook with pulses and why they're great ingredients and great for nutrition and health. And a woman named Linda Hachfeld in Mankato, Minnesota, heard me speak. And Linda said to herself, "That's who I want to work with on the fourth edition of Cooking à la Heart." Linda is the godmother or grandmother of this book that was first put together in the mid-1980s as part of a National Institutes of Health funded research study that was modeled after the Framingham study. They wanted to look at 3 communities in Minnesota: Minneapolis, Mankato, and Moorhead, very diverse types of communities across that state. Linda was part of the group of public health nutritionists working in Mankato who were trying to recruit participants from that community to be followed for 4 years in the study. And Linda and her colleagues said, "We really need, people are going to give us their time. They're going to drive to appointments to meet with us and share their information with us. We need to give them a gift." And they came up with the idea of a cookbook. And so they started collecting recipes from community members. And Linda jokingly refers to the first version as a church cookbook. That's what it, looked like. It had a lot of hot dish recipes. Anybody who's from that part of the world understands the difference between a hot dish and a casserole. And when the study was nearing its end, Linda said to the entity, the Mankato Heart Foundation, I believe was the name. She said, "I'd like to buy the rights to the book." And she started her own publishing company called Apple a Day Press. And so Linda then took the book and in 1992 published a second edition where she integrated dietary guidelines for Americans and the latest research on healthful eating patterns. She did the third edition in about 2005, 2006. And then she decided to retire and sell the rights to all of her properties to a publisher in New York City called The Experiment. And Linda's plans for retirement got thwarted by the fact that The Experiment came back to her and said, "Linda, we'd love to have you update some of your cookbooks." And Cooking à la Heart was one of them. And they said, "Can you do an update in 30 days?" And Linda said, "Sure." And then Linda started looking through it and she realized, oh, great horrors, this is much more than just updating a few things like the latest dietary guidelines. This probably needs a full rewrite because I think, as we all know, cooking styles have changed, ingredients have changed. There's so many more ingredients. We have so much more access. Cooking equipment and tools have changed. And so Linda started doing this work and very quickly realized, gosh, I need a partner in this. And she found her way to me.
Nice. And you actually then embarked on helping with the full rewrite of the book.
Yeah, Linda initially wanted just my help in writing the first few chapters. And I said, I'd love to contribute more. I'd love to help develop recipes. I'd love to think about reshaping the flow of the book, adding new chapters. And I will say that Linda is one of the most amazing collaborators I've ever worked with. We met every week via Zoom for 16 months as we worked our way through this, discussed and deliberated what today's home cook who's interested in health and nutrition needs, wants. We tested recipes endlessly. I got a small advance for this project, and what I spent on groceries far exceeded the advance. And I'm sure any other cookbook authors listening to this are nodding and smiling, as we all know what that's like. So, yeah, in the end, we sent off the final manuscript and patiently waited 6 months for it to come out. And, I can say that, one of the big opportunities that Linda found really exciting is The Experiment said, well, we'll fund the photography. So we gave them the list of recipes we recommended to be photographed. They had a really talented graphic designer who was willing to do watercolor illustrations. And so the book has some really beautiful graphical elements that brought it to life. Previous versions didn't have any photography. So this version is very much updated. I think we retained maybe 8 to 10 recipes from previous editions. And yeah, it was a real joy to work on this. I am so proud of my baby, as I call it.
Yes. And so is this the book that you think you were talking about when you were on the call with LaDoms?
No.
Is there another one?
Yeah, I've been working on a memoir for a number of years.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah, so that's,
great.
it's in process, and it's sitting there waiting for me to give it some attention again.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting with writing projects, though. You do have a hierarchy of what needs the most attention at the time. And it is amazing to work with a book that goes through several revisions and to come up with almost a brand new book. And tell us what you did when you were involved in the rewrite. You obviously with Linda's direction, but all the recipe testing, developing, writing the chapters. Tell us about the research that went into this particular edition also, and what you leaned on and to update that.
So the previous editions had a lot of nutrition science in the front matter. And I said to Linda, in today's world, people don't want to read that much. We need to go with science light, and we need to be less of that finger wagging health professional and more of the let's invite you into the kitchen. Let's invite you to try some new ingredients. Let's invite you to experience some new flavor profiles. Linda, I will say, was a little resistant to that because she was very married to the previous 3 editions that she had shepherded through revisions and rewrites and whatnot. But in the end, she agreed with me. We also talked about, the addition of new chapters like breakfast and brunch, sweet treats, handheld items, a whole chapter devoted to pizzas, flatbreads, and piadines. I will say the inclusion of a term like piadine now to me strikes me as a little, I don't know, elitist and too fancy. When I was going through this, I was very careful with who got to see the baby before she was, fully polished. But had I given this to like my book club, we read works of historical fiction and nonfiction. And had I given them the book, they would have been like, what's a piadine? What is it? I don't want to make that because I can't even pronounce it. So I wish I would have been open to more feedback from potential users. But I also, I had a husband who ate his way through absolutely everything I tested. And I remember one challenging 2-week period where I could not get a pork tenderloin recipe to work. And my poor husband was like, I really love pork, but gosh, not every single night. And this was during 2021. The world was still pretty shut down. Scampering over to a neighbor's house to share food didn't feel comfortable yet. So that challenge of too much food and overwhelmingly challenging recipes to get just right are painful memories to look back on.
Yeah. And when people read then the title Cooking a la Heart, what kinds of recipes are they going to be exposed to inside the book? Other than the few that you mentioned, what can they expect to see and taste and discover inside the book? Because it looks to me like a lot of delicious food, but I want you to tell them what it is.
Yeah, well, so Linda and I like talking about eating patterns that promote better health outcomes. And yes, while it is about better health outcomes related to cardiovascular wellness, that relates to healthy aging. It relates to someone like me with type 1 diabetes, having better health outcomes. What kinds of recipes are they? They are inspired by food cultures from all around the world. Linda and I leaned into what we knew as farm girls growing up in North Dakota and Minnesota. I call Linda my sister from another mister. We're like the same person separated by a generation. She grew up about 2 hours south of where I did. I was on the North Dakota side of the Red River border. She was on the Minnesota side. We both grew up on farms with dairy cows. We both had rhubarb growing with great abundance. We had moms who liked to cook with, true wild rice from Minnesota. Linda, loves walleye. I don't love it as much as she does. So anyway, we had that in common, but we wanted to celebrate the fact that there are food cultures all over the world that have a reason to be respected, enjoyed, and celebrated. Maggie, you and I have spoken before about how the Mediterranean diet has so much research behind it, and that we as eaters and consumers, when you hear Mediterranean diet, our minds can go off to some place like that vacation in Italy we've been on or that we're dreaming of. If you talk about something like the DASH diet, everybody's kind of like ho hum, even though there are similarities between those eating patterns, one designed by culture, one designed by researchers. So Linda and I made a point of looking at food cultures from Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, Northern Europe, and picking out recipes and dishes that were either part of our culture, things that we'd eaten while traveling, things that we learned from neighbors and friends. There isn't one perfect eating style or eating pattern, right? But there are traits among them. And so what will you see in this book? You will see a lot of ways to use fruits and vegetables in all their glorious forms, from fresh, frozen, canned, dried, 100% juice. You will see a lot of recipes for things that bring more flavor, like seasoning blends, spice blends, sauces, dips, aioli, salsas. We have a lot of chapters that are just there to remind people that taste is the number one reason we choose the foods we do most often. And if you like the way something tastes, you're going to go back to it. So,
Yeah. Yep. And I think that Mediterranean is the style of eating that is based on a culture, but I still feel like it's kind of become a word that maybe people's eyes gloss over when they see it, like for the 100th time, eat a Mediterranean style diet, eat this way. But this book has 500 easy and delicious recipes to help make every meal heart healthy. Tell us what it is about Mediterranean and heart health that puts these two things together.
yeah, so the Mediterranean eating pattern has abundant use of fruits, vegetables, legumes, peas, chickpeas. If you think about hummus, for example, as a food made with chickpeas, it uses healthful oils like extra virgin olive oil or olive oil. It celebrates seafood. For many parts of the Mediterranean, seafood is eaten much more frequently than here in the US. Whole grains, somewhat more common in certain parts of the Mediterranean. So it tends to be more plant forward, but it's not vegetarian. There's still, we included a chapter on beef and pork. We have burgers in there. One of the strategies that we used is the concept of the blend. In a previous life, I did some research showing consumer acceptance of beef and mushroom blended products. And so we did beef and mushroom blended tacos, beef and mushroom blended burgers. One of my husband's favorite recipes in the book is a beef and bean blended burger with a roasted poblano pepper on it and pepper jack cheese. He thinks that is just like it's it when I say that's what we're having for dinner. So we used a lot of different research strategies, techniques, inspiration from Mediterranean eating cultures, but also, I live here in Northern California. We eat a lot of Mexican food. So I am heavily influenced by that. I'm also influenced by the fact that we can get fresh fruits and vegetables from farmers markets year round here. We're very blessed. But with that said, I grew up on a farm in Northeast North Dakota where my mom preserved lots of foods to enjoy throughout the year from her garden. So I am always a fan of having something that's canned on your shelf that makes it easier to get a fruit or vegetable, or something in your freezer. Yeah, you're smiling and nodding. You're doing that knowing dietitian nod that I.
Well, it's true because I like to eat a lot of legumes. My husband can eat them, but he started experiencing some difficulty with them recently. So I just keep a can of every variety of legume like in my pantry, and I can make a salad. I can I can heat them on the stove, put some olive oil and sage and red pepper flake in it. It's so easy with canned beans in particular to still get those, even if not everybody's eating them in the house. And I think that, it's just amazing that we have the variety available canned that we do that can really contribute to a very healthy and more expansive way of eating rather than feeling like we, can't have it because I'm the only one. It just makes it so much approachable. And I think even true for people that live alone, people that are cooking for two. There are so many products that are really good frozen canned items that make eating this way so approachable.
Absolutely. And when we think about something like seafood, when people say, well, I don't like cooking because I don't like the way it makes my house smell. Great. Have a tuna salad sandwich. That counts.
Yes.
So reminding people that things that maybe we take for granted or that we eat furtively because we think that they're not going to be approved by someone. Going back to your comment about opening up a can of beans, if anybody's ever had that experience of cooking beans from the dry form and they're still not creamy, that's completely maddening, right?
Oh, totally.
So the perfectly cooked beans that you get out of a can are a huge blessing for any home cook.
100%. The only way I was able to overcome that unless I bought a pressure cooker. And
Yes.
if I was cooking a large quantity, every time I use it, I'm like, this piece of equipment works miracles on legumes.
You're very brave to use a pressure cooker.
I bought the Rycon, it's like Rycon brand, or I think it's what it's called. I bought it at Sur La Table. It's it's not big, but it was a high-end, just nice stovetop pressure cooker. It hardly makes any noise. And when I have to cook a large quantity of legumes, because if I'm making, let me give an example. Something where I would need a larger amount. And it's not like a red lentil or something that would cook faster. I use it almost all the time. And it is amazing. It's an amazing tool, but there are times if I just want to have a little legume on my plate that I won't do that if it's just something that I'm making for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny. It's funny you say that. Like, it is brave to use a pressure cooker. It was a new way of learning to cook. Lorena Sass had a book that came out maybe 20 years ago called Cooking Under Pressure, maybe. Excellent charts and good recipes in there for that. And that is in my kitchen all the time because I'm always referring to it when I use it. But you mentioned that, like, even things like fish, I think things that we remember historically, maybe from our families or experience growing up, there's in the cooking space and in the food space in particular, there's so many new evolutions of things. If you don't like plain tuna, I mean, what about all the different kinds of tuna seasoned pouch pack that they have that you could take in a lunch or on a camping trip? It's incredible. It's not like the canned tuna that we maybe grew up with.
No, those little snack packs that come with
Yes.
the little built-in spoon in the lid. My gosh,
Yes.
there's a lemon basil one that I just love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. 100%. So I have two questions for you in terms of creating this book and working on what I call the guts of a cookbook, which is the manuscript and the recipes and all the words on the page. And there's two things that as cookbook writers, we have to do. We have to write the words and we have to cook the recipes and translate all that into words. I want to talk about the development of recipes and the testing of it and the true cost when we would be cooking at home or eating out anyway. I think your husband made a good point. We do taste things over and over and over again when we're developing recipes. And maybe we get tired of that. Like, don't think I can eat another pork recipe because we've been trying this and it's just, I need something else. But if a cookbook author says to you, or cookbook writer, I want to write, it's going to be too expensive to develop and test the recipes. How do you feel that compares to the money we would spend anyway on food? Like I mentioned, if we're already cooking at home or we're already eating out, what do you think happens to our budget in the middle of a cookbook project? I'm wondering if we can shed any light for people who are letting this part of the project hold them back.
Yeah, that's a really important point. What would you be spending otherwise? I think the area where I was pretty liberal was buying spices.
Okay.
And I still have a large abundance of things that I wanted to try, spice blends that we made to put into the opening recipe chapter. But other than that, there were no ingredients that I bought that I didn't want to have in my kitchen anyway. Having the cookbook gave me an opportunity to bring them into my home.
Right.
Again, I'll say blessed to do this during the shutdown of the pandemic because we weren't going out a lot.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of options. So, and I think probably the most delightful discovery of having gone through this, I was really worried at times that I would hate cooking after this, that going into my home kitchen would be something I would no longer look forward to. I love cooking now more than ever.
Yeah.
Because I develop new shortcut strategies, techniques, and attitudes about cooking that make it even more joyful for me, which surprises a lot of folks. But yeah, I'm really glad I had this opportunity. I'm glad that when I walk into my kitchen now, I have a spice cabinet that is overflowing with options for me to peruse and enjoy. Yeah.
And a book with a lot of new favorite recipes that you created.
Yeah. Yeah, I should though. I should tell you though, when Linda and I did the divide and conquer on this, she'd already made quite a bit of headway. Like the bread book or the bread chapter, she did most of the development on that. I contributed one recipe, a banana bread recipe that I've been making since I was like 12 years old. Um, Other chapters we divided very evenly, like the soups. Um, Certain chapters I took lead on and did most of the work, like the pizza chapter, flatbreads and piadines, wink.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a divide and conquer. I tended to write most of the head notes. So she probably did 60% of the recipes. I did almost all of the head notes. We had a daughter of a dietitian at the publishing house who did nutrition analysis for us. I wrote the first two chapters and I kind of served as the managing editor to keep us moving along. We had a shared Dropbox folder. We worked via Zoom. We did obviously have a managing editor who reviewed the final manuscript. Then we had a copy editor.
Yeah. Amazing.
Who,
So I saw the list in the thing. Did you, Susanna, do it?
If you know her, I should shut up then.
She's very exacting. She's been on the show.
She asked for the length and diameter of an English cucumber, and I lost my mind. I'll just leave it at that.
Yes. Well, I think when you're working with an editor, they're seeing the book from this whole other perspective. And you do just have to say, this is if their goal is to help make this book usable and friendly for people using it, then I have to say, God bless the work they do, and I'll answer the question about how big the cucumber is.
Yeah, and my answer to that was it does not matter. But I will say she did have some call-outs that our managing editor missed that were very important for usability and being kind to the end user of the cookbook.
Yeah. So if anybody listening wants to listen to that episode with Susanna Fass, I believe it was during the pandemic when I interviewed her. I don't know the exact number but I'll link to it in the show notes. How about that? Because this is something that if you're writing a cookbook, you have to go through the copy editors, hopefully with an editor that's paying attention to, because recipes are different and cooking is different and food is different than writing a romance novel. And
speaking of romance novel, I should tell you about the heartbreak of this project.
Tell us.
So the experiment said we want a book that can compete with the American Heart Association cookbook, which at that time, as we were working on this, their latest edition, I believe, had 450 recipes. So they said to us, we want at least 500. And Linda and I went, gasp, okay, we can do it. We ended up submitting a manuscript with 565 recipes.
Oh, wow.
And the heartbreak was when they came back and they said, paper has quadrupled in price. Shipping prices have doubled. We can't afford the page count to include everything in your manuscript. We need to start doing some judicious cutting. And they were so sly. They said, could you tell us what 10 recipes you want to cut?
No.
and then they came back and said, could you tell us 15 more? And pretty soon, it was like, how do you boil a frog? You very slowly turn the water up. So that's how about 50 some recipes got cut. I think the final count here is 512. So, we have some, stepchildren, as we call them, that are sitting on the shelf waiting to get used in some way. And all my good intentions for things like, well, just share them via social media and draw people in like that. There's so many things that get in the way of promoting the book, right? You think the hard work is the developing the manuscript, but then when you have to be the soldiers out there every day doing the promotions and marketing, it's really hard and disheartening at times. So Maggie, thank you for this opportunity to talk about cooking all hard today.
You're welcome. I love it. And so I want to encourage people that you're spending money on food somehow. Right now, if you want to write a cookbook, you're either buying ingredients, you're ordering DoorDash. I don't know what you're doing in terms of getting your food. When you start to work on a cookbook project, you're going to be a lot of ingredients coming into your house. You're going to be spending money on that. So I always feel sorry for our expectation of our advances to cover costs that we already are incurring in our life anyway, I think is what I'm driving at. Now, our time, maybe we want our time compensated for, but if you're cooking, you're spending time anyway. So what I hope happens is that we have a realistic expectation about what people might spend in their food budget, how much time they might spend, and try to keep it similar to the audience of your book.
It's really great
It
advice.
it helps. It helps because if you're thinking, well, I need a, 5-figure advance to cover my ingredients, it's like I probably shouldn't be writing that cookbook anyway. Because, home cooks who are interested in health and nutrition maybe don't have a huge budget anyway. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing then is the time we spend writing and how that is different and what that looks like. That's the time I think that we could be trading off for money producing income in our professional life, perhaps. If we're behind the computer working on a chapter for a cookbook, we, instead of maybe going out and doing a talk for a community group or teaching an online class or creating a course or something like that, I can see the income trade-off there. But let's talk about that part of the project for you and what it was like in terms of the actual writing of the manuscript and what the time really was like that you spent doing this. And was it nights and weekends, or did you incorporate it into your day-to-day life?
It was all of that. Because I'm running a consulting business,
Yes.
you know, I was keeping up with my client work and,
Yes.
my retainer-based work, my project-based work. I would typically designate Saturdays for testing recipes, Sunday if needed as well, or Sunday would be, preparing my written concepts for recipes to test the next week if I was
Yes.
doing something during the evening to integrate into our, evening meals. So I worked 7 days a week throughout most of those 16 months working on the book. There were little breaks at the end, right? When the managing editor, the copy editor would have it, and then it would come back to us to respond to. I think the hardest part for me is when we finished the 18 recipe chapters, we submitted those to our managing editor, and I had 3 weeks to write the first 2 chapters, and it was right before Christmas. I was burned out. I wanted to go to the holiday parties, but I had to just buckle down and do the research and do the writing. And then Linda and I would go back and forth, copy editing, or she would copy edit me and make suggestions. So that was a really painful period of time, because I was just burned out.
Yeah, and I do think that those sometimes we can't predict when the time's going to come when we do have to sit down and really research and write something, and the time when the edits are going to come back that we have to comb through and see answer all the questions that the copy editor might have. We have no way of really gauging exactly when that's going to happen. So there truly are sacrifices on that end. Yeah. It's a finite project though. Do you know what I mean by that, Amy? It's not like a food blog that goes on and on forever.
Right. The manuscript was finally sent off to the printer. We breathed a sigh of relief and we waited the 6 months until it was, in our hot little hands. I got my copies much earlier than Linda, just by chance. I was in New York City for a produce conference. And I reached out to the publisher and I said, Matthew, are you by chance available for dinner Thursday evening? Why? And I said, well, I'm here in New York City. He goes, well, you should have told me sooner. I'll make myself available. Let's meet. So he gave a restaurant recommendation. My husband and I met him there, and he had this little book bag with him, little cloth bag. And Matthew, such a delight. He bikes throughout New York City from his home in Brooklyn to his office in Midtown. And yeah, so there he was on a December evening with this little bag that kind of had some splatters on it from the bike tires. Yeah. And he pulls out a plastic bag inside the cloth bag, and inside the plastic bag were the first 2 copies of the book that he had gotten as proofs from the printer.
Yeah.
And said, these are for you. Merry Christmas.
Oh. It's an amazing thing.
I was speechless.
Is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of the frustrations. What about the joys of this project? Just overall things that you really are amazed at and excited about in the midst of production schedules and copy edits and all that kind of stuff.
There are 2 things that really strike me. The first is my relationship with Linda. She is one of the kindest, smartest, best people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And she continues to be this soft, gentle guiding hand. she has a way of setting me straight. I can be a little ornery and prickly, and when we got edits and whatnot, and I was raging against that, she has a way, because she used to be in that role as
Yeah.
the owner of a publishing company, a way of saying things that I find very soothing and that I can lean into and accept quickly. The universe gave me Linda when I most needed her.
Yeah.
And she continues to be a wonderful friend and mentor to me. The other is hearing people's reactions to the book.
Yeah.
And just hearing what has brought them joy, what recipes they like, what they wish there were more of. That feedback is so, oh gosh, comforting and generous and lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What if I said this to you and curious what you think about this? I think writing a cookbook is all about relationships with ourselves as the person who has to create this work. I mean, and trusting ourselves and showing up for ourselves. And because no one's going to sit down and do this for us. No one's going to go in the kitchen and buy that spice and mix up that blend. We've got to do it. Our relationship with our readers, who are the people you're coming in contact with now and who are listening to this podcast. And then our relationship with our whole publishing team, the people who are involved in the creation of this book, which Linda did for 3 editions before, she worked on this revision with Experiment. And I think that people think it is cooking and it is writing, but it's people.
I think for me that relationship piece, you really struck me with that comment, because probably the most important relationship is my relationship with myself. As someone who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 7, a lot of my early lessons about food and managing diabetes were about not this, not that, count 15 grapes for your 1 fruit exchange. And my mom was so instrumental in helping me appreciate the aromas, the colors, the joy. Well, she was a big gardener. I never liked joining her in the garden. I much rather stay in the kitchen. But today I am a gardener. So God bless you, Mom.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was writing this and thinking about what brings me joy in the kitchen, what soothes me when I'm stressed about having a chronic disease that gets a little more challenging the older I get, it was all about what are the positive messages that have brought me forward on my journey for health and well-being? What are the positive messages that are going to make it more approachable for somebody who maybe has never made salmon before? So making an oven roasted salmon, here's how easy it is, and a little spice rub that's easy to make, those easy messages said in different ways, more eloquently than I can say now. That was really important to me. I don't want anybody to look at this book and go, oh, it's about heart health written by 2 dietitians. That's not going to taste good, and it's not for me. This book is for everybody who likes cooking, wants to try some new things, wants to explore more ingredients, maybe build a slightly broader repertoire of techniques and put more whole grains in your pantry, feel comforted by the fact that you have canned beans in your pantry and you have frozen broccoli in your freezer. I want this to be about comfort, enjoyment, and, oh, by the way, better health outcomes.
Yeah. And I think from head to toe, this style of eating would probably, I don't like to use the word never, just like I don't like to say 100%, but if you were to go to a physician or seek medical care and they were curious about your diet, you reported that you were trying by and large to eat this way, I can't think of any chronic disease state that they would say it's not really such a good idea. It's truly a lifestyle and way of eating that's full of flavor, full of enjoyment, full of color, full of fresh ingredients. And you could take heart health off the front of this cover of this book, and it could be other cookbooks that I have interviewed people for. It's just the same kind of things.
Yeah. And the all a heart part, yes, it leans into the heart, the cardiovascular wellness, but all a heart is about the joyful appreciation of cooking and aromas and ingredients and flavors and textures. So I got license plates.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about our hearts, though. Our hearts are the center of our emotional life and how we feel about things. And that's really the crux of our whole life. That we can have a capacity to cry when we feel sad, to feel maybe anxiety if something's happening in our life, maybe a child's going off to live on their own for the first time. But then the flip side of that is if you are willing to feel that, the joy that comes with things, the the pleasure that comes with a walk and, cooking and things like that that bring us pleasure. So to me, the emotional life is really the heart. It's the heart of who we are and what we do. And this happens to be talking about food, but it's so much more than that if you really start to look into it. Shared meals and preparing things for yourself and, having the blessing of having food and ingredients in your kitchen and knowing that you're truly nourishing your body and your soul and your spirit, when you're eating certain foods.
So I'm not a terribly superstitious person, but there are some coincidences with this project. I talked about, saying I want to write a book, and then a few weeks later, Linda contacted me.
Yes.
I was diagnosed, or I found out I had type 1 diabetes on February 7th, 1979, a few weeks before my 8th birthday. This book was published on February 7th,
Wow.
2023.
Amazing.
Yeah. And that it's focused on cardiovascular wellness and has the heart icon throughout at the bottom, of every page by the page number. There's that little red heart. My birthday is Valentine's Day. So, this professional, personal lives collide.
Yes.
There's
yes.
so much meaning and impact for me in this project and in this book and in this love affair with doing this work.
Yeah. And I hope that people that are being exposed to this book for the first time can hear that through you and will give this book a try. You can access cookbooks in a lot of different ways. You can check them out from libraries. I'm sure this is distributed in libraries. It's available in bookstores. It's available online wherever books are sold. And there's, ways that people can access the information that's in there, because there's a lot of really great information too, not just the recipes, but tips, tricks, and there is some nutrition information that's very, very approachable. And I think from even that perspective, if someone's really trying to eat more healthfully as a home cook, it's a great resource.
Yeah, and I'd say for anybody who's curious, what do the recipes look like? What's the style? Go check out Amazon. Look at the book on Amazon. The publishers shared 5 recipes there, including one that I get the most feedback on, and it's Greek-inspired baked chickpeas with tomatoes and feta. You open up 2 cans of chickpeas, a can of diced tomatoes, you add some feta, some honey, some oregano, a little lemon juice. You make it in the same pan you bake it in. It's great the first day. It's even better the next day. So that's what this is about. Easy, approachable, delicious cooking that brings you along for great flavor. And if this develops an eating pattern, better health outcomes potentially.
Correct. So if there's someone listening that is thinking about a cookbook project, writing a book, cooking things that go into a cookbook, what would your advice be to them?
Write often, write all the time, keep writing, keep focused on what you want. You will find that publishers and editors will tell you who you are and what you should be. Stay true to who you are and what you want to be.
Yeah. Because if they will try to steer you in a certain direction. And I got an email from someone I mentored on a local book that she's been working on. I think it's at the publisher now. And she said, is it really true that you don't get to decide the title of your book? I said, well, it depends. I've written 4 and I named 2 of them, and the other 2, the marketing department helped name. But I felt like the title of the book, I didn't need to be that much wedded to. I needed to be more wedded to like who I am as the author of this book. And if that title still reflected what I believed in and what the spirit of this book was, and it would help it to sell better, I was all for a title change. It's hard though, sometimes we cling to these things that we think we know we have to have it this way, but that's not always the case. I do think teams of people like you worked at the experiment with that are in the publishing industry, they know a lot, and I had to trust that they did. Yeah.
Having partners who you trust, a very important piece in this.
It is important. So why don't you, before we do that, as we're starting to wrap up, I love to ask everybody this question. It's kind of like picking your favorite sibling, but do you have a favorite cookbook, what that might be? And I'll share that link in the show notes.
Yeah, I do. It's The Book of Bread by Judith and Evan Jones. It was a gift from my godmother when I was 9 years old, and it was the most mature, aspirational gift I'd been given up to that point. She knew that I was getting into the kitchen with my mom, learning how to cook and bake. and it's the book I turn to most often. It is splattered throughout. It is a book with illustrations, not photos. Judith Jones, Julia Child's editor.
Yeah.
If our house were burning, that's what I would run in to save.
Was Evan her husband?
Mm-hmm. Evan was her husband.
And they wrote that together, huh?
Yeah.
Very neat.
Published in the late 70s.
I get some repeats, but this is the first time I've heard The Book of Bread by Judith and Evan Jones, so I will link to that also in the show notes. Well, it's been a delight to talk to you, Amy, about your book. I would love for you to tell everybody how they can connect with you or with Linda or with more information about the book online.
Absolutely. My website is farmersdaughterconsulting.com. That's farmersdaughterconsulting.com. There's a page there that talks about the book. It links to an Amazon Associates page. Any of the authors know you make a little bit more money through that than just a direct Amazon sale. The book's also available through other major sellers. It's on the Experiments page. So if you go to the Experiment Publishing, they have a page devoted to the book. If you are on social media, I'm at Heart Amy on Instagram and Facebook, and would love to connect with other authors, cookbook lovers, and continue to have this discussion about things that we are so happy and passionate about.
Yes. Well, I'll link to all those in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, your journey, your work with Linda, all the things we talked about, joys and frustrations of writing books, honoring food cultures. And I can't thank you enough and wish you nothing but the best with the next phase, which is the marketing and promotion and talking about the book. So it's been great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Maggie. It's been a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.